So yeah, let's get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk for a bit. I'm hopefully not going to ramble too much, but please do bear with me and or throw things if I do. Snoring is fine, by the way. And ideally there's some time at the end for questions and a bit of korero, which kind of seems appropriate given that my talk's all about, participation. So, with that we'll launch on in. As my talk title says, or suggests, the tech industry, including open source, and I guess especially open source, has a really strong role to play in contributing to the stronger, kinder, more resilient New Zealand. So what I'm going to do during the course of this talk is do a quick rundown of the main precepts behind open data, open government, open source, less on that since y'all are already experts in it, and how it all ties together into something called Civic Tech or Civic Technology, and of course how all of these can have and do have incredibly positive effects when they're used well on our societies, our communities, our whānau, and of course ourselves, because we're part of this. So one of the things that I always like doing when I start any kind of conversation or talk is just to make sure that everyone in the room has a strong shared definition of whatever we're talking about, to make sure we're all on the same page. So as I talk about open data now, I just wanted to make sure that, well, for the purposes of this talk, to define open data as any data that's publicly available and on an ongoing basis. So it doesn't mean data that's publicly available for a short period of time. It doesn't mean only for a select group of people. Even if it's just people who have to register, that's still not technically public. And of course with no barriers to entry, like being asked for money to access it. Quite literally, it means publicly available. So to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Now, this definition is quite wide, right? So it includes, and I do apologize if there are council people in here, I love y'all, but I'm going to mention some of the stuff you produce. So the definition of open data also includes things like really badly made PDFs, that are like scans or JPEGs of a document. So that data is publicly available, but it's not terribly accessible, and it's not terribly useful in many things without throwing a ton of resource behind it, which is a barrier to entry. So a bit problematic. And of course it's not live as well, so it's static, and it's great to look at for trends if one's doing previous analyses and whatnot, but it's generally rubbish for any kind of real-time or live application. It becomes out of date, and depending on how good or bad the documentation and metadata is, one doesn't always know when it is out of date, which can lead to problems. So of course one of the best ways to do this is to make your data not only human readable, which is said council PDFs, or for some humans at least, but make it machine readable, right? So you can, well, the organization who's releasing the data can do this, members of the public can do this, you'll see that more and more as we go through the talk, and I'll talk about it. And of course other organizations, they could be NGOs, they can be private organizations, they could be community organizations, anyone. So to go back to my earlier example of council minutes in shoddy PDFs, if we're talking about attendance records, one of the best ways to do that is just to make a simple Excel spreadsheet, right? Because it's much easier for people to do stuff with. Now, of course, an even better thing on top of that, not instead of it, is to release it as an API. Excel spreadsheets are fantastic for people who are not developers, for example, but developers, as we know, like APIs, and I'm talking here about open APIs. So once again, this is going to be super accessible, and ideally, I'm going to say the documentation word again, documented. So one knows how to use it and what to do with it. I know that a lot of stuff doesn't get documented because people think it's unimportant and there's no time and they're too busy making rockstar code. People, it's not useful that way to most other human beings. So of course, once you've got an open API, that means people can pipe data into like anything from maps to apps. They can make sure that it's up to date, they can make sure it's live, they can make sure it's real time, all of these kinds of things, right? I mean, we use them for our, like Auckland Transport. I've been using the Auckland Transport app, and mostly getting on the right buses most of the time. So yeah, APIs are good, data's good. Anyway, so I do hear a lot of puzzlement from people, and it's, sorry, I am battling to see the faces in the audience, so I can't read your expressions. But I do hear a lot of puzzlement from people when I talk about things like open data and why one would release data, right? Because it's the whole like, the data leads to information. Information leads to knowledge. Knowledge is power. Why on earth would we share data? And so I'm going to answer that briefly. I'm going to answer it mostly from a social value or societal value lens. There are really good commercial reasons, not only for using open data, but for producing open data. I'm not going to get into them now, but if anyone's curious about it, like I've written about it and stuff, come and talk to me afterwards. I can send you links. There are very strong reasons for it. But to get back to that social lens, there's a very strong case to be made that is made that any data that's generated by publicly funded institutions, government, for example, well, it should be available to the public who paid for it. We paid for it, why can't we access it? Now, to be very clear, I'm not talking about all data all the time. Some data needs to be anonymized, some data needs to be private, right? We've got to be very, very careful that we don't victimize people or re-victimize people, for example, or release anything that could be damaging to someone. But there's plenty of stuff that can and should be shared. And like a ton of organizations and research backing up that open data is generally a really good thing for governments, for commercial businesses, for society in general. So, some of the reasons. It enables ordinary citizens to understand better what's going on in their societies and to make much more informed choices about the decisions they and their elected officials, as a result, make. It enables people either to push for change or to push for the status quo, right? Change isn't always a good thing. Neither is the status quo. But based on evidence rather than anecdote, Bob down the pub says climate change isn't a thing. Or opinion or emotion. I know that emotions are really, really important in our decision-making things because we're stuck in meat puppet brains, but solid data and solid evidence is really helpful. It builds higher levels of digital literacy, open data, interestingly. So people either need to understand the basics of data and how to access it and maybe some basic things what to do with it, or they need to go and meet other people or know other people who know what to do with the data, right? So they've got a much stronger incentive to learn about the situation in general. I've seen it a lot with GovHack. I'll talk about GovHack shortly. It builds a much more transparent government and power structure, ideally a more accountable one. Transparency doesn't always lead to more accountability, but it's the first step. And this ideally enables people to hold, our governments, I guess, to account. One of my favorite things is when that horrifies governments. I always get a happy moment from that. And it gets people really, really engaged, right? Or it's more likely to get them engaged. So fewer black boxes into which our opinions, our information, how we feel about policy matters, how we feel about our societies, fewer black boxes into which those disappear and then never reappear again. We hear about a decision that got made and we don't know why, based on what. The less that happens, the more engaged a society tends to be. Because otherwise, as we see, look at voting turnout in so many countries. People just disengage, they get disenfranchised, they get cynical about it, and they think, why bother? So the more people we can get engaged by opening stuff up, the better. Because, last I checked, we live in democracies, and it's really nice for people to feel empowered and engaged in them. And as I like to think of it, we do get to interrogate our gods. It's one of the privileges that we have living in a democratic society. And with that, I'm going to segue nicely into talking about open government. To be clear, I'm not suggesting government are our gods, anything but they do have a really powerful effect on our lives, both national government and local government. By national, I mean central government, not the party, political party. I'm not going to get into a political discussion right now, that's for later. So across the world, more and more governments are turning to the principles of open government, and you can go and look all of this stuff up, and I'll talk about it, as they look for how to stay relevant, right? Do more with less. We always hear about tightening budgets, but more that needs to get done. People want more for less, faster, cheaper, better, all the things. So government's trying to do that. And how to be more responsive, because as our citizenries, as our people become more empowered, they demand more. They say, government, it's not good enough. We require this of you. So open government, as the quotation says there, and you all have already read it, but I'm going to read it out anyway, means that people living in a country have the right to access information and proceedings from the government. It's beautiful jargon from Wikipedia, apologies for that, but it basically means all the paperwork and stuff they produce. It's generally done in the form of open data, of course. It's in New Zealand, we've got a really good regime about it. It's everything from budgets to OIA requests, right? Of course, it varies hugely by country. So what people can access and the form they can access it in and how and the mechanisms for doing that is like vastly different between countries. But the principles tend to remain the same. So the main ones are transparency, accountability, participation, and engagement, right? Participation means me participating in my society. Engagement ideally means not only me engaging with government, but government engaging with me and with all of us, asking us what we think, and then listening to us, maybe making some choices based on that, ideally, in an ideal world. So, it's quite simple. Open governments make for better democracies. It enables us, the public, to better oversee what our government is doing. You know, we elected them, they're our representatives. We pay in taxes and a bunch of other ways for them. It's really important that we engage with them. It empowers us to be a lot more informed as well about what's going on. And it helps, as a result, push governments to be a lot more accountable and effective and responsive. And again, talking about effective government, if you all want to get into that in question time, happy to talk about that. I know it's a really tricky one. So, one of the major open government initiatives is the OGP. Are you all familiar with the OGP? Cool, a couple of people. Bear with me. So the OGP is the Open Government Partnership. It was founded in 2011. It started out with eight states, I believe, of which New Zealand wasn't one. And the idea is to provide an international platform, here's the official quote, an international platform for domestic reformers committed to making their governments more open, accountable, and responsive to citizens. I think it's now, it's in 75 countries these days. New Zealand signed up a couple of years back as well. And as you can see, it's got quite noble aims. So, our action plan, every 2 years one has to produce an action plan, a National Action Plan, or NAP, saying what you're going to do. Ideally, there are new initiatives, not existing ones that you kind of shoehorn in. New Zealand got into a little bit of trouble for doing that the first time around. So try to do better this time. But the idea is to improve public service delivery, right? To increase transparency and accountability, all the stuff I keep saying, greater public engagement, and new ways for citizens and governments to work together to solve common problems. So you'll hear a lot about service design and service delivery and things like that in some of our modern government departments here in New Zealand as well. And some you won't hear that from, but they're getting there. So we've got 7 major commitment areas as the OGP NZ. Sorry, not we, I'm not part of it, I'm a member of the civil society. But it's open budget, improving official information practices. So we've got a really good OIA regime. That's the bit where you can write into government and ask them to give you information, and then they have to have a really good reason for not giving it to you. But people still do play a bit fast and loose with that sometimes, so it's trying to improve that. Improving open data access and principles. So it's not just about, hey look, we've put some data on the internet. It's the documentation around it. It's finding out what kind of data people might actually want, so that you're putting up stuff that people might find useful, rather than open washing and being like, look, we've made open data here, but we're not going to talk about this stuff. And tracking progress and outcomes of the open government data release. That's what I was talking about. For a number of reasons, even with the best will in the world, sometimes things get held up, fall over. There's a lot of resource that goes into open data. Ongoing engagement with the OGP. It's definitely something the OGP can do better on. I'm trying to be really, really diplomatic here in terms of engaging with the public. A lot of people, both senior government levels and a lot of the public, don't know about the OGP, this massive thing that we've signed up to that's an international treaty to which we have commitments. People don't know about it, and it's meant to be for us. Improving access to legislation. So for those of you who track democracy nerd stuff, it's, Civic Tech groups, and I'll get onto that shortly, are doing things like starting to scrape the Hansard and try and make it all kinds of interesting stuff, but it's getting government to do that better as well. And of course improving policy practices, so things like talking to people before you write policy, not just lobby groups. for example. Getting there. So the idea is, those of us who are interested, and I would encourage us all to be interested in this stuff, it's really important. Watching closely, they do have to publish their milestones, how they're doing against their deadlines. Watching it closely, yeah, so can you. It's all public information, and we can hold these people to account, and we should. Each one of these commitments has at least one government agency as the lead agency behind it. And the more of us who push, the better. Just throwing that out there. Right, so the third tier is open source software. Obviously, I'm not going to get into that too much because y'all know like way more about this than I do, frankly. The last thing I want to do is patronize anyone, ideally. But I did want to bring into the room just 3 of the most important characteristics, I think, of when I think of open source software, and you'll see how it all ties in shortly. So it's freely shared, it's collaborative in nature, and it's got practices and norms for effective remote communication and collaboration. So the ability, we don't have to be in an office in order to get shit done together. And it enables faster, more powerful innovation, right? Like we've seen this over and over again. It's one of the things that we always like to talk about when we talk about software. It's like open source can do amazing shit. Right, and the reason that I've just gone through all of these things is this. So each of these, open data, open government, and open source software can be seen, and often are seen, as kind of their own separate things, right? There's a little bit of overlap or interaction between people involved with a lot of them, but they're normally separate. And I think that that's really unfortunate. It's one of my stated aims is to try and help do more to make those overlaps. And one of the areas I think with huge potential there is called civic technology. You heard me mention it earlier, or Civic Tech for short. Right, now we're getting into like my big thing. The idea with Civic Tech is that it's not just hacking for social good, right? It means that it's hacking around like civic issues. So it's going out into one's community, figuring out what the people in one's community actually need, and then finding ways to directly help them as technologists who have the ability to do that. It's not just going, hi, I think you have a problem, I'm going to drop a solution on you and feel good about myself. That's not the way to do it. Comes in 3 main flavors. There's citizen-to-citizen stuff. So that's all about generally helping improve citizen mobilization and connection. For those of y'all watching the USian political situation, I wouldn't go into it much, but the various resist movements and whatnot are a really good example of citizen-to-citizen connection, if those make sense, people directly engaging with each other to try and do stuff. There's citizen to government. So the idea with that is that's improving the quality and frequency of interaction between government and the citizenry. To use a local example, fyi.org.nz. Are you all familiar with that? It's a really good engine for, if you ever want to make an OIA request, you can either do it directly to the agency involved, or you can pop onto fyi.org.nz, and it will route you to the correct thing and help you get it will then publish your OIA stuff as well. It's a really cool engine. But parliamentary monitoring, all of these kinds of things, that's citizen to government interaction. And of course there's government to government as well, that's GovTech. I'm sure a number of you are either already involved in GovTech stuff or will be. So the idea there is around improving government service delivery, right? So that's everything from GovCMS, for example, in Australia, to here in New Zealand an initiative called Lab Plus, which is being run out of the Department of Internal Affairs, which is, exactly about that, trying to make sure that the services the government delivers spend a bit more time thinking about the citizenry and like how to make their lives easier, not more difficult. There's a whole bunch of really exciting stuff going on, like just Google things. So I'm going to tell you about 3 of my favorite civic tech stories, just to try and shape a bit of a phase space for you. 2 are here, because New Zealand, and one's overseas. And I've chosen them, if nothing else, to show how much open source is able to contribute to these civic initiatives. There are hundreds, right? It's really difficult to choose. And they go from everywhere, from Kenya to Taiwan to the Netherlands to New Zealand to Mexico to, it's fantastic. If you ever want to feel good about humanity, look at civic tech stuff. I swear to God, you'll feel better. Right, so, first one. eq.org.nz. Who remembers eq.org.nz? Ha! I know, it's a great example, right? So we remember the story. 2010, there was a terrible earthquake, or series of earthquakes in Christchurch. Terrible structural damage. Thankfully, no one was killed. In 2011, that changed. 125 people died. And I mean, with the acceleration forces were up to 2G in 2 places. I mean, we saw what happened to the city. It was horrifying. So imagine having skills in open source coding and open data, as like a whole bunch of you do, right? And thinking, I wonder what I can do to help. Not, I'm going to wait until someone asks me to help, like the council or government. What can I do immediately to help? And that's what a whole bunch of the tech community did, right? A number of you will probably know them personally or actually be in the room. Sorry, it really is quite bright. They stepped in. So what they did, they used a very elegant, very inspired thing. They didn't reinvent a wheel. They used an existing platform called Ushahidi. Y'all know Ushahidi? So yeah, Swahili for testimony. It was originally built in Kenya to monitor election violence. But it's really, really good at basically crowdsourcing information and plotting it on a map. You need a data point, you need a coordinate, boom, on a map. So that, with open data and crowdsourced information coming in from people on the ground in Christchurch, meant they could spin up eq.org.nz within, I mean, it was a few short hours. It was incredible. And helped people find out how to navigate their city, where to access the essential goods and services that they needed. Because remember, everything just kind of fell over. And what was going on? So people could send in stuff via a website form. They could send it in via email, SMS code, or Twitter. Of course, there's the EQNZ hashtag still going. And the Help Me hashtag as well for emergency stuff was really powerful. So here's some fun numbers for you. 70,000 visits in the first couple of days. Not a small number. A little under 800 reports in a little under 800 different locations. I think that's pretty cool. And 3 weeks later, when sort of normal communication channels were restored, it was taken down, which also feels sort of good and respectful, right? The idea was to help, not to try and overrun anything. Now, it was a huge community effort. I'm not saying it was just the tech community. It was the public sector, the private sector, civilian society. Everybody got involved. There were a whole bunch of other related initiatives over the next few years, right? So I'm talking in recent history as well. There was a whole bunch of GIS, geospatial information, data sharing agreements between agencies, which enabled like good mapping services and whatnot. There were websites using property data. I didn't know about this. This is really cool. That enabled people to check the status of their homes and land. I mean, those got like millions of hits within the first few hours of release, apparently. There was a construction intention viewer that was built using open data and open source tools that, I am going to read some numbers here, it saved $4 million in construction costs within the first year of use. And a crowdsourced competition that I think it was high school kids could take part in to map building footprints, right? Because there was a lot of that information missing. To map building footprints as open data and build a huge open data database for property at like an incredibly low cost as well. My numbers here say $0.02 per footprint. That's pretty cool. So this is a really potent example, I think, of how open source knowledge and open source ideals and community and open data, of course, can contribute like hugely in times of crisis. It's generally faster, it's more efficient, uses fewer resources, and those resources are often costly to begin with, and it takes some of the load off the existing services, which are often at that point like massively overstretched and buckling, right? So we can all get involved in this stuff. And for anybody who's curious and doesn't already know Seismic, do you all know Seismic? Cool. Yeah, it's built on Drupal. A friend of mine asked me to point that out. So it's there. And it's still going. So that's a digital archive, for those who don't know, of video, audio, documents, and images related to both of the major Christchurch earthquakes. As the quotation says, it's not just about the shaking, but also about the struggles, the chaos, and the creativity that followed. It's quite beautiful. Right, second example, GovHack. Who knows about GovHack? Sweet. I kind of feel like maybe I should skip this slide now. But anyway, I'm just going to keep going, so bear with me. So for those of you who don't know about GovHack, which I saw a couple of hands that weren't raised, it's the Southern Hemisphere's largest open data / open government. So now we're back to the open government, open data thing, hackathon. I'm presuming people in the room know what a hackathon is. Is anyone unfamiliar with what a hackathon is? Cool. Right. Does anyone want to explain what a hackathon is, or shall I? I'm happy to crowdsource it for an explanation. Okay. A hackathon is basically a bunch of people coming together to hack together a solution either over a couple of hours or a weekend. It can be apps, it can be like anything like that. It's literally that. Doing this for a weekend with a group of people. Yeah, I'm sorry, that was a really short explanation. So if you see issues, well, I'm sure some of you sometimes see issues in your community you might like solved. In Auckland, I'm thinking about housing stuff, for example. Or at least people trying and tackling it. Or you might see stuff in your community that you really love and would love to see like more of or see in other communities. Or sometimes you actually just want to go and like chill out over a couple of days and work on building stuff, and it's not your job. You don't have to stress about it. So if any of those things, kinds of things appeal, then GovHack is probably something that might appeal to you. It's an event, as I said, it's a weekend-long hackathon. It started as a small sort of civic hacking / protest in Australia in 2009. There were some fantastic people there, including the Ian or Pia War, who now works at LabPlus, that I mentioned earlier, who were a little irritated because, well, from what I've heard, they were being threatened with legal action by a government department or several for using public open government data. They were a little unimpressed, and they formed GovHack as a bit of a... Now, it's grown since then. It's no longer a sort of protest thing at all, and now we've got the private sector involved, we've got the public sector involved. These days, government ministries sponsor it, they host it, they open up data for it. It's really, really, really cool. And it came to New Zealand in 2015. So we've just had our third one in mid-July, which is kind of cool. And it keeps getting more powerful. It has more mana, it has more background. More people want to get involved with it, not only to attend it, but to find ways to support it. So this year we had it in 8 locations, up and down New Zealand, and another 27 in Australia, and hundreds of people in New Zealand, and thousands in general, because Aussie's, a bit bigger, came together and they used open government data. You have to use open government data. That's the only requirement, is that whatever you build, no, there are 2 requirements. Sorry, it's a Monty Python sketch now. The main 2 requirements is that you have to use at least one open government data set in the thing that you build, and that can be based on anything. And I'll get to the second one shortly. So, what people built was entirely up to them, right? It could be based on, as I said, stuff they saw in their community that they wanted to help out with, or stuff they were excited about, or, we're really not prescriptive about that. They just have to use at least one public data set. And so the New Zealand ones, we had apps addressing the housing crises at this point in the country and livability, access to swimmable water, matching volunteers with charities, industry diversity and concentration across New Zealand. In previous years, people built things like an empathy engine to try and help people understand how they fit into our general society. It's incredibly creative what people come up with. I think we had, I'm trying to remember, yeah, there you go, 72 in New Zealand. So if you head over to that link, you'll be able to see all the projects, the data sets that they used, and links to the data sets, the descriptions of what they built, and this is the other thing, the other requirement that I mentioned, the code has to be open source. It's quite simple. If your code isn't open source, you don't qualify for the competition. Because it is a competition, we give away lots of money. Which is quite cool. So you've got access to all the code as well. And the idea is that people can keep building on it or hacking on it or not. Or it's very much up to people. Right, the third example, my final example, is from Taiwan. So we're familiar with open source communities, we're part of them in various ways, and how they work. So if you can imagine an entire community built around open source ideals that exists in real life as well as anywhere else, right? So flat or no hierarchies, being truly agile, being truly collaborative, buildings together. A perfect example of this is GovZero. which is based in Taiwan, as I mentioned, and it's East Asia's largest civic hacker collective. It's really, really exciting. There are their ideals. Right, so it was founded in 2012 by a couple of people, and, well, it really took off in 2014 during the Occupy movements. We remember the Occupy movements, right? Not a lot happened as a result sometimes. In Taiwan, a lot happened. It was called the Sunflower Movement over there. And it was a student movement that inhabited the Taiwanese parliament for 23 days. It was just a huge, basically, vote of no face in the Taiwanese government at the time. And it really resulted in like massive political change. At one point, the people involved with the Sunflower Movement had more political goodwill from the country than the actual government did. And they got leveraged, which is really cool. So GovZero was a part of it. They provided not only a lot of the sort of tech on the ground, like making sure there was Wi-Fi and whatnot for the students sitting in, but also helping with paradigms and processes, right? Like ways to have good corridor in public spaces that was respectful, ways to listen to each other, ways to work together. Great open source stuff. And their aim, as it says there, is to fork government, which I think is lovely. I'm not sure what that looks like in real life, but it's very interesting watching them as they try it. So what they've done ever since the Sunflower Movement is GovZero and a bunch of other like sort of open X community people have been working literally in collaboration with the government to develop a set, or well, to develop and use a whole set of technologies that basically give binding power to how the citizenry might feel about policy issues. It's absolutely fascinating. So one of the tools that they use is called Polis. Are any of you aware of Polis? Check out pol.is if you get a chance. It's fascinating. So it's open source. It's all up on GitHub. And what it does is it uses machine learning to build consensus. So it's quite simple, basically. If there's an engagement issue, like how do we feel about the conference today? I could throw that up in Polis in a couple of minutes. People can throw in statements, and then other people can say they agree, they don't agree, or skip it. And depending on how you said it, anyone can throw in a comment. So what it enables people, and then the machine learning starts to separate it in various ways, or to cut the data in various ways, so you can really look for areas of agreement and areas of disagreement. It's fascinatingly fun. So VTaiwan uses that, and a whole bunch of in-person tools as well, like inviting politicians to then actively comment on questions raised in the Polis stuff to help build a stronger legislature. So they have actually resulted in some serious legislation changes, which is fascinating. Of course, it's a digital initiative, VTaiwan, and it's having difficulty scaling up to national levels. If nothing else, I mean, we see it here in New Zealand, not everyone's online. So how do you scale digital platforms to people who are offline in rural regions? What does that look like? Do you take the tech to them? Do you build offline processes for it? There's huge potential there. We're watching closely, and hopefully what I illustrated with these three examples is just how powerful open source can be, or how powerful we in the open source community can be in really having a massively positive impact on the societies in which we live, outside of our open source communities, right? So we can work with government if we want to. Some of us do. Some of us leave. We can work in government, we can work with government, and we can also work around government, right? Civic Tech does all of these things depending on what the people on the ground need at the time and what resources are available. At no point is this saying that governments can just stand back and go, it's okay, the citizenry is going to sort it out for themselves. That's not appropriate. But there are ways that we can work together to really empower each other, which are really, really exciting. And we can influence both the private sector and the public sector to do better, because as people who work in these things, we can require the companies for whom we work and with whom we work to be better actors in our societies as well, right? It's not all on governments. It's on our companies too. Right, so I'm wrapping up basically. So, as I've said, as I hope I've shown, and as I think we know, open drives progress, right? It can build incredible things. I truly believe that de-escalating scarcity as a source of power is, well, through things like open data, through things like open government, through things like open source software, of course. These can only be good things, certainly if they're done respectfully and appropriately. People can still be bad actors in the system. As we know with open source software, the power should be in what one does with something, not kind of keeping it in a locked safe and keeping it away from everyone else. And there's like tons of case studies where, as we know, where this is, throughout history of this enormous value that gets generated when humans share information with each other. I think civilization is one of the classic examples. Another one that we're probably all familiar with is the internet. I know bad things happen on it, but it's still an amazing piece of technological development, I think. So open source code and open source ideals, because it's not just the code, right? It's the way we think about collaborating, it's the way we think about sharing freely, it's the way we think about working either remotely or in person, listening to other people. All of these ideals and our knowledge and our code can be known and spread by us, and are known and spread by us. But I think we can do more to have, I think we can do much more to help build open societies, right? To step outside of our communities into the wider community. Because that way we can help build a more societies which are, well, those things, more transparent, more free, more informed, more engaged, more connected. That one's not up there, but I believe that. And more truly powerful. Not scarcity as a source of power, but collaboration and sharing as a source of power. So, do we want a stronger New Zealand that looks after her people and her environments, that's envied around the world for her kindness and resilience? We can have her, we can help build her if we want to. We can help build a better world, rather. And we have the keys to do this. It's our choice. We can open the door if we want to. So I encourage you all to think about that. And that's kind of my talk.